ready to dive back into Acts. We come today to a concise little passage which acts as a conclusion to the story so far. Luke wants his readers, who are scattered in churches right across Asia Minor, to know just how well things began. Okay, it's fairly broad brushstrokes at times and things get messy over time, we know that. But in keeping with the sense that this was a God moment of fulfillment, we can see lots of elements of an ideal experience of being God's people in what's going on here in the church in Jerusalem. Now, I reckon there are three ways in which their practice is presented as being ideal. Firstly, it reflects what Jesus had taught and modelled about living in the kingdom. And secondly, it seems to mirror the best of life in the promised land. And finally, of course, it's a little foretaste of life in the new earth when Jesus will return and set everything to rights. So is Luke just reporting information here, or is he being didactic? Is he wanting to teach readers about how their churches should be? Well, let's go and have a look at what he says. So Acts chapter 2, verse 41. So those who accepted Peter's message were baptized, and that day about 3,000 people were added. But what next? Well, we get the impression that quite a few of them now choose to hang around in Jerusalem with their new friends, partly with an expectation that Jesus might return any minute there and wrap it all up. So, over the following days and weeks, this new normal starts to shape their lives, and Luke records some distinctive practices. This is the first. They were devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching. And he uses an interesting word here, proskanteruntes. He uses it quite often with regard to the believers, and it means being super eager and focused and passionate about something. Did you spot a little change that happened here, though? Because whose teachings were people proskanteruntes about before? Well, Jesus's. Crowds followed him everywhere. They stayed listening to his every word till after the sunset. But Jesus didn't write his words down, as far as we know. So the change over here to the apostles being the teachers is really significant. Their words carry his authority because Jesus gave it to them. Here's what he prayed the night before he died. He said to his Father, I have given them the words you've given me. Just as you sent me into the world, so I sent them into the world. The apostles have got a foundational role in passing on Jesus's teaching. We've got them to thank that we now know Jesus' words. And devotion to the teaching of Jesus translates into devotion to the apostles' teaching. It is a big mistake to drive a wedge between the two of them as if they're different things. And not only that, love of the apostles' teaching mirrors the attitude of God's faithful people in the Old Testament towards his words. This is what the psalmist said. How sweet are your words to my taste, sweeter than honey to my mouth. I gain understanding from your precepts. Therefore I hate every wrong path. Your word is a lamp for my feet, a light to my path. What else are they devoted to? Well, to fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer, which is exactly what Jesus had taught them. Remember when he said, a new commandment I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. And he gave that instruction, of course, in the context of their last meal together before his death. They'd had so many. Now, these believers begin so well. They want to meet and eat together. They're showing generosity and hospitality to the stranger and the poor in their midst. And there's even a suggestion here of the communion meal happening in the context of their eating together. And did you know fellowship meals actually occur all through the Old Testament story of Israel too? It's woven into covenant practices and the instructions there. But one of the craziest ones happens in Exodus 24 when Moses and 70 elders go up on the mountain and they see Yahweh in all his glory. And it says God didn't raise his hand against these leaders. He invited them. And they saw God and they ate and they drank. I love that this picture of feasting and fellowshipping together in the presence of God is the hallmark of the good life with him. And lastly, unsurprisingly, prayer features as well as part of their daily practice. Maybe they prayed the words that Jesus had taught them. Maybe they used the prayers of the scriptures. Maybe they were inspired by the Spirit just to pour out their hearts as Jesus had modelled for them. And can you see the way this community is a lovely picture of that vertical relationship with God, that horizontal relationship with each other, all a taste of that age to come when we will finally be together at the feast of the Lamb. Now, those practices of studying the word together, of fellowshipping and eating together and praying actually sound like pretty reasonable expectations for any Christian community. But listen to this, it sort of gets a bit more intense and dramatic. He says, reverential awe came over everyone, and many wonders and miraculous signs came about by the apostles. This moment in time was, well, I nearly said unparalleled, but I'd be wrong, because this was just like those days of awe and wonder that came over Galilee and Judea when Jesus was ministering. Have a look at this description from Luke 5 to the reaction of the healing of a lame man. It says, astonishment seized them all, and they glorified God, and they were filled with awe, saying, we have seen incredible things today. It's the same word, phobos, used there. And do you remember too, last time, what Peter had said from the book of Joel? I will pour out my spirit in those days, and they will prophesy, and I will perform wonders in the sky above and miraculous signs on the earth. What we're meant to see here is a God moment. It began with the coming of Jesus, and it is still unfolding before their eyes as Jesus now works through the apostles by his Spirit. Miracles abound in the book of Acts. So hold that thought as we come to consider whether this description of the first church can be considered as a reasonable prescription, an expectation for our churches today, or whether something slightly different is going on. And Luke continues, all who believed were together, and they held everything in common, and they began selling their property and possessions and distributing the proceeds to everyone as anyone had need. What's going on here? Well, it seems these people, they have been awestruck by what they've seen. They've moved to fear the Lord and to love their new family. And they've got people amongst them who are far from home, others who perhaps have become believers out of dire circumstances. And they've got this bond in the Spirit that is driving them to costly, voluntary kindness that's overcoming divisions of class and ethnicity. And there's this sense, I think, at the time that Jesus' return was very near, and they've got a sense of hanging out together in Jerusalem like a big family until he came. But of course, Jesus had taught the members of his kingdom to be generous. He'd said, remember, give to him who asks of you, and do not turn away from him who wants to borrow from you. He said, sit lightly with money. Do you remember this? Seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you. Do not be afraid, little flock, for the Father has chosen gladly to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions, give to charity. Make yourselves money belts which don't wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near nor moth destroys. And remember the change in rich Zacchaeus when he put his faith in Jesus and gave the money away, or the generosity of the women who were supporting the work of the Jesus team out of their own means. In addition, we do know that once again, this way of living was exemplified in the life that God desired of his chosen people in the promised land. This is from Deuteronomy 15. If there's a poor man with you, you shall not harden your heart, nor close your hand from your poor brother, but you shall freely open your hand to him, and shall generously lend him sufficient for his need in whatever he lacks. Love for one another was this living proof of the inner transformation that had happened in them by the Holy Spirit. Every day they continued to gather together by common consent in the temple courts, breaking bread from house to house, sharing their food with glad and humble hearts. What a time. And Luke's actually repeated some of the details here to drive home this picture of fellowship and unity and brotherly love. It's interesting they're still going up to the court, isn't it? As well as meeting in their houses. But if this is the time of fulfillment for God's people, where else would you find them? As Isaiah said, let's go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us concerning his ways, that we may walk in his paths. The law will go forth from Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. I think if they hadn't been driven from the temple, these early believers would have just kept going. Jesus taught there all the time. As Jewish believers, this is actually their space. But Luke is also unfolding a strange paradox in the story too. We notice that the Spirit of God fell not on the temple, but on the believers in the upper room nearby. His dwelling place is now in them. So we've actually got the temple meeting within the temple, with those glad and humble hearts, which are exactly what the Lord wanted in his worshippers. Do you remember what Jesus said to the Samaritan woman? Woman, believe me, an hour is coming when neither in this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father, when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For such people, the Father seeks to be his worshippers. So we can see a rupture is looming. And we'll find this next time, because lurking in the temple are proud and angry hearts. And Jesus had told his disciples the physical temple is actually doomed for destruction. And in the temple and in their houses, they are praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And the Lord was adding to their number every day those who were being saved. What a lovely little description to close this section off with. These Jewish men and women have received and believed in the Messiah Jesus and have become the true remnant of Israel. They are living out the blessings that God had intended for his chosen people. And that word for praise, of course, it's over 100 times in the Old Testament, in the Greek translation of the Old Testament, often in the context of being in the temple or in Zion, with the ultimate picture actually being of all nations being drawn into this praise as well. Here's a couple of examples from Psalms. Psalm 67, that your way may be known on earth, your salvation among all nations. Let the peoples praise you, O God. Let all the peoples praise you. Sing to the Lord, Psalm 96, bless his name. Proclaim good tidings of his salvation from day to day. Tell of his glory among the nations, his wonderful deeds among all the peoples. For great is the Lord and greatly to be praised. He is to be feared among all gods. And now, here it is. The wonderful deeds of God through his Son are being proclaimed in the temple, in the houses, in the streets, to these people who've now come from every land. And God was transforming them by his Holy Spirit so that they could sing of his salvation too. So how should we respond to this text? Is it a benchmark by which we can assess the life of our own church communities? And was that Luke's intention for his readers too? Well, yes and no. First up, there are elements which are unrepeatable, and that's the nature of history. What we see uniquely in these early days is God working through the apostles to demonstrate continuity with the work and words of Jesus. So it becomes this one-off foundational period. He's giving the later church every reason to trust the witness of the apostles. But here too is a picture of God's people living out in fullness all that God had promised them, all that Jesus had taught them about the kingdom. Now, we do know from the letters in the New Testament that the churches didn't maintain doctrine and unity and love. Persecution, the struggles of everyday life, simple human nature took its toll. Luke and the other New Testament writers do call men and women back to these foundational beliefs and practices. So I think we would do well to consider how we can serve each other more generously, read the scriptures more eagerly, shine the gospels into our communities more graciously, and pray earnestly to the God who is always and always has been working in our world for his glory. See you next time.